This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. The US president boasts of economic successes and achievements in international peace, but passes over mention of rivals China and Russia, working to keep alive his chances with the local electorate. Germany's Chancellor in Beijing to reset ties with Chinese leaders, both sides pledging deeper cooperation and freer trade. Now, Hong Kong's finance chief projects another year of solid growth, unveiling a budget focused on ramping up investment in innovation hubs and AI training. The fastest rise South Korean births in 15 years and a second straight annual increase, a rare rebound for a country with one of the world's lowest fertility rates. Also tonight, a new report sees China as a major driver of increased military spending in the region, revealing uneven growth in defense budgets across the world. And move over K and J Beauty. Chinese beauty brands are having their moment. C Beauty is expanding beyond the home turf with sleek branding and competitive pricing. But can they win over international consumers? US President Donald Trump has delivered a combative State of the Union address. In a nearly 2-hour primetime speech, the former reality TV star pulled off some surprises and dramatic moments as he tried to sell his divisive policies to the American public.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
Facing low approval ratings and fearing losses in November's midterm elections, Donald Trump sought to paint this as the golden age of America.
Our nation is back, bigger, better, richer, and stronger than ever before.
The president pointed to highs in the stock market, lows in petrol prices, and trotted out gold medal winners from the Winter Olympics. Even when talking about the Supreme Court's repudiation of its signature tariff policy, Mr. Trump struck a softer tone, calling the ruling unfortunate and insisting that the import duties will benefit Americans.
Despite the disappointing ruling, these powerful, country-saving, it's saving our country, the kind of money we're taking in, peace-protecting. Many of the wars I settled was because of the threat of tariffs. I wouldn't have been able to settle them without. Will remain in place under fully approved and tested alternative legal statutes. Congressional action will not be necessary. And as time goes by, I believe the tariffs paid for by foreign countries will, like in the past, substantially replace the modern-day system of income tax, taking a great financial burden off the people that I love.
The president was more combative when defending his crackdown on illegal immigrants, which has killed at least 2 American citizens. He returned to his campaign playbook.
Her mother found her lying dead in a bathtub, bleeding profusely after being stabbed 25 times. Lisbeth's killer was a previously arrested illegal alien.
Using real-life crimes to demonize immigrants and focusing instead on the victims and their families.
If you agree with this statement, then stand up and show your support. The first duty of the American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. You should be ashamed of yourself not standing up. You should be ashamed of yourself.
The president's speech was light on foreign policy. He made little mention of China or Russia, but briefly made his case for a possible attack on Iran.
They're working to build missiles that will soon reach the United States of America. But one thing is certain, I will never allow the world's #1 sponsor of terror, which they are by far, to have a nuclear weapon. Can't let that happen.
From the international arena to domestic affairs, Mr. Trump offered no hint of a change of course. In a rousing finale, he cast America's first 250 years as just the beginning, promising a future brighter than ever, but one that will be tested at the ballot box in 9 months' time.
For more, CNA senior China editor Olivia Xiong joins us live from Beijing. Now, Olivia, can't help but mention, rather notice that there wasn't much mention of China in President Trump's speech. How should we read into this?
Yes, I tell you, it was a record-long speech for President Trump going on for nearly 2 hours. But yes, no mention of China, a country that President Trump himself and in recent years other administrations have labeled the biggest strategic competitor for the U.S. Today's speech really stands in contrast to President Trump's previous State of the Union addresses that we've seen, for example, in 2019, 2020, where he accused China of taking advantage of the U.S., stealing American jobs, how he had touted that he had imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of Chinese goods into the U.S. This time, no direct mention of China. Instead, only a slight jab at Chinese military technology that had been used in Venezuela. Have a listen.
And America's armed forces overwhelmed all defenses and utterly defeated an enemy, good fighters, to end the reign of outlaw dictator Nicolas Maduro and bring him to face American justice. It's a major military installation protected by thousands of soldiers and guarded by Russian and Chinese military technology. How did that work out? Not too good.
And some analysts I've been speaking to here in Beijing did say that it was expected that perhaps China would not be mentioned as much or foreign policy would not be mentioned as much, given that President Trump's attention has been much more on domestic issues. And also as there has been a shift in his approach to China in his second term. Less talk about great power rivalry and more talk about a G2 framework approaching China with a greater focus on competition in trade and technology. President Trump has also emphasized his personal relationship with Chinese President Xi Jinping just last month, saying he had an excellent phone call with President Xi. This caution also perhaps coming ahead of his expected visit to China in just over a month. President Trump perhaps not wanting to rock the boat too much there. Vitaly?
And not to mention that Mr. Trump's address, I mean, this comes as Washington is ramping up its allegation of Chinese nuclear test. Do we know what's Beijing's response to that?
Yeah, Telly, so it's quite clear that even though President Trump did not make specific mention of China by himself, that there are clearly still issues that are difficult between these two superpowers. China's foreign ministry today, for example, refuting accusations by the U.S. that it's massively expanding its nuclear arsenal. Also, the allegation that China had conducted a secret underground nuclear test nearly 6 years ago.
美方指责捕风捉影、遮遮掩掩，根本站不住脚。美国为逃避国际军控义务，不惜栽赃抹黑别国，这种做法严重损害自身国际信誉。中方敦促美方遵守暂停核试验的承诺，维护国际禁止核试验共识，停止为重启核试验寻找借口。
And going into the expected visit by President Trump to China, it's also clear that tariffs and trade are still going to be very much on the table, despite the U.S. Supreme Court striking down President Trump's reciprocal tariffs. And for China, those tariffs related to fentanyl. We have just seen a new statement come in from China's Commerce Ministry in response to the U.S. representative saying that the U.S. would continue to advance a Section 301 investigation into China's compliance of its Phase 1 trade deal with the U.S. and that it may possibly take tariff measures. In response to that, China said that it hoped the U.S. will view the implementation of the Phase 1 agreement objectively and refrain from shifting blame and avoid taking the opportunity to, quote, stir up trouble or pick fights. And we have to remember that despite the Supreme Court's ruling, there are still in place about 30% tariffs of Chinese goods into the U.S. And so that is something that the Chinese side will be very keen to talk about, as it says it's open to more trade negotiations and that visit by President Trump. Oteli.
Right, many thanks for that report. CNA's senior China editor, Olivia Xiong in Beijing. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz is in Beijing seeking to reset ties with China as both sides pledge deeper cooperation despite a widening trade imbalance. Now, Mr. Merz has met with Chinese leader Xi Jinping in the last hour in his inaugural visit to his country's largest trading partner. The Chancellor is expected to stress on German and European interest in his talks. And I've got CNA's Crystal Chia joining us live from Shanghai. So, Crystal, what basically came out from this meeting between Mr. Xi and Mr. Merz?
Yeah, so we're still waiting for more lines, but indeed this highly anticipated meeting is happening as we speak. Like you said, it's widely expected to focus on strengthening political trust, deepening economic cooperation, although analysts do not expect any major investment deals or agreements to come out of Merz's visit to China. Now, this comes after a meeting between the Chancellor and Li Qiang, where Premier Li Qiang called on both sides to work together to safeguard multilateralism and free trade. His comments likely alluding to U.S. tariff policies that have affected global trading markets. Now, Merz also said that he wants deeper and fairer economic cooperation with China. His statements coming amidst heightened economic concerns in Germany because of intense competition from Chinese companies. Now, at China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs press briefing today, there was a question stating how Merz did not speak of China as a systemic rival, unlike previous leaders. Here's China's response.
中国和德国是全方位战略伙伴，积累了良性竞争、融合发展的成功实践。中德合作，互惠互利，为两国人民带来了实实在在的利益。双方应当秉持相互尊重、平等相待、互利共赢的原则，推动中德关系取得更大发展，共同为世界的和平与繁荣做出更大的贡献。
Now, we are only 2 months into the year, but Merz is already the 4th European leader to visit China, potentially signaling growing concerns surrounding the trade deficit between Europe and China, which is near historically high levels. Now, from last year, economists started using the term the second China shock. This refers to a new wave of deflationary pressures on markets, Europe in this case driven by China exporting in high-tech sectors like electric vehicles, lithium batteries, and solar cells. Now, for Germany in particular, the car-making industry, which is so much of their identity and growth engine, has been hit by Chinese car exports. This has led to a flurry of profit warnings and sharp declines in market share. Executives from these car makers, such as BMW and Mercedes-Benz, are also with Merz on this trip. So the Chancellor really faces a delicate balancing act. He must redefine this economic relationship, finding a way to help German companies while not accelerating the downward spiral. Oteli?
Hey, many thanks for that update. CNA's Crystal Chia speaking to us in Shanghai. The time now to go for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight. South Korea's KOSPI breaches the 6,000 mark for the first time on the back of an AI-driven chips rally. Hello Hi there. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. It is now time for your business news with Roland Lim. So, Roland, it looks like the AI-driven rally has actually driven the South Korean equity market to a new milestone. Tell us more about that.
Yes, Oteli, yes. For the first time, it's overtaken the French stock market in terms of market cap. It's also leading globally as the world's best major index so far this year. Easing concerns around artificial intelligence-led disruptions also bringing cheer to the equity markets in the region. It fueled a rally on Wall Street overnight. Now, South Korea's KOSPI index surged past the 6,000 level for the first time, driven by gains in chipmakers Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. Samsung shares ending day 1 3/4% higher, 203,500 won apiece. SK Hynix up 1.3. Hyundai Motor also jumping more than 9% to a record close on a multi-billion-dollar investment plan to expand into the AI business. Sister automaker Kia surging nearly 13%. And LG Chem, well, that advanced 10.5% its shares, that is, after South Korea approved its first petrochemical industry restructuring project. It took just over a month for the KOSPI to hit the 6,000 mark since the index breached 5,000 last month. The benchmark index has risen 44% year-to-date after rising 76% last year. The stock market climbed to a valuation of $3.76 trillion, surpassing France's $3.69 trillion. Now, experts say the KOSPI success highlights investor enthusiasm for artificial intelligence, particularly memory chips and robotics. The rally's also been driven by a mix of shareholder-friendly reforms and the country's expanding role in the global AI supply chain. Japan's Nikkei 225 also climbing to another record, lifted by a surge in tech stocks and easing expectations of an imminent rate hike following new central bank board nominations. The benchmark Nikkei 225 rising 2.2%, while chip testing equipment maker, that's Advantest, it jumped 7.5%, and Tokyo Electron gaining 4.2%, providing a strong boost to the index. The Hong Kong economy is still transforming but has recalibrated its course. That's the message from Financial Secretary Paul Chan as he wrapped up this year's budget speech. He announced a slew of new relief measures and spending initiatives. He doubled down on integrating tech innovation and boosting Hong Kong's role as a legal hub. But a cautious tone from him too, as he pledged fiscal discipline to help the city continue to navigate global trade uncertainty. CNA's Deborah Wong has more on the budget.
There was some cautious tone in Paul Chan's report, but I would also say that there is a lot of optimism this year round compared to the last 3 years where Hong Kong experienced deficit. In fact, Paul Chan started off his speech talking about how the economy is forecasted to grow up to 3.5% this year, and he also talked a little bit about the IPO boom that Hong Kong experienced last year, bringing in about $280 Hong Kong billion, and to attract more investments, to continue that trajectory. The government will be enhancing its tax regime, specifically for R&D expenditure as well as for family offices. And the city will also be enhancing liquidity of its digital asset market to bring in more services and products for investors. Let's hear more from Paul Chan.
本屆政府致力擴充經濟容量同埋提升競爭力，加快發展北部都會區北都，以人才同埋創科驅動增長。 因地制宜發展新質生產力，推動經濟高質量發展。我哋預測香港經濟喺2027年至2030年期間，平均每年實質增長3%，基本通脹率係平均每年2%。
So on the social front, we're also expecting to see more policies to support the elderly. We're looking at about 3 billion Hong Kong dollars more in terms of care services vouchers for seniors. Now, we were also looking very closely at the Tai Po issue. That was Hong Kong's worst fire disaster in decades, and there was a concerted attempt to bring in relief funds to support the residents. And part of that is also addressing bid rigging as well as corruption. So we did see Paul Chan address that in this speech. He says that to crack down on bid rigging, it's going to be enhancing the tender system under the Urban Redevelopment Authority. So funds will be allocated to help them revise that, and they will also be providing professional advice and support for owners when they go through upgrading works. And so separate funds, about 4 billion Hong Kong dollars, will be allocated in total to enhance inspection works as well as lift upgrading works for future projects.
Let's check in on the Greater China markets. Hong Kong's benchmark Hang Seng Index held on to gains, closing up 2/3 of 1% as Paul Chan raised the city's growth forecast. Mainland stocks also closing with gains. Shanghai Composite up 0.7, Shenzhen up 1.2. With investors snapping up rare earth and metal shares. The CSI Rare Earths Index jumped 6%, leading gains onshore. Now, ahead of the Hong Kong budget, well, non-governmental organizations and lawmakers in the territory had been calling for a more comprehensive support system for the elderly. The number of seniors who live alone continues to rise, and issues such as loneliness and social isolation are becoming increasingly prevalent.
This 19-year-old girl is on a mission, delivering meal boxes to the underprivileged elderly in Hong Kong. Belle has been doing this for almost a year now, distributing up to 50 meal boxes to the city's vulnerable communities. Initially funded by her own pocket money, she later tapped on social media to raise awareness and crowdfund through online donations. Grandma Tang has been living on the street for 7 years. She's afraid to live alone in her own flat after her husband died. Affectionately known as the cardboard granny, she collects cardboard scraps in exchange for money and can make about $13 a day.
自己嘅身體又好差，而家好差，即係氣好促啊！即係幫住有咩事啊，冇人知啊嘛，冇整咗間屋啊，已經我先生整邋遢咗間屋啊，我唔想我再喺間屋度整邋遢。
In choosing to keep the flat uncontaminated for her daughter, Grandma Tang puts up with the loneliness of living on the streets.
教會成日都有人嚟嘅，有人嚟同我開解我，拉我傾下偈咁啦。同埋救濟軍啊嗰啲咯，有我都好開心啦，拉下傾下偈講下啊。 唔係話係要飲食先係好嘅，舒緩下嗰啲情緒。我咁樣做啊，日日都係喺痛苦之中過日㗎，冇開心㗎。呢個兩餸飯嚟嘅。
When Belle delivers lunch boxes, she also brings them a bit of joy and companionship.
While I give out these boxes, I also do ask them about how they are, how's their health, about their family, or just what they're doing day to day. 你是哪里人？我是吉林的。吉林的哦。你也说普通话，你知道？是，我香港的，但是也可以说普通话。I think those little conversations do help. It does make them happy, and it makes them feel like somebody cares about them, especially somebody younger.
Every 1 in 5 persons in Hong Kong is aged 65 and older, and according to official data, the number of elderly individuals living alone has gone up by over 73,000 in the past 5 years. The government spent more money on social welfare in last year's budget. It distributed more care vouchers for the elderly.
比較一段長嘅時間咧，即係嗰個支援咧，似乎都係停留喺一個財政嘅支援。咁財政係好緊要，但係 係一個即係 shortcut 嚟啦。咁啊，如果真係要substantial 啲嘅一個長期嘅一個解決一個社會問題，好多時都要有服務同埋有政策。
鄧家彪議員 CNA spoke to lawmaker Bill Tang. He pushed for an elderly-friendly environment last year in Hong Kong's Legislative Council. Mr. Tang said the city's privacy laws in the past made it hard to help vulnerable seniors if they did not reach out for assistance.
The fundamental or the most concerned demand is how to protect the safety, especially the elderly living alone at home, how to protect their safety at home, because no one wants the home actually equal to a trap, because you can imagine the elderly, the singleton elderly living at home, and once happen accidents, no one knows.
Policies have changed, allowing social workers to track the number of seniors living in a unit. The next step is to use technology to help keep them safe.
It's very easy, just place a sensor, a very small device in the on the door of the unit. Then, and if the door has not opened within 48 hours, then make a signal, notify the elderly's friend or neighbor or relative.
Mr. Tang said that a trial program is currently in place in some public housing estates.
And that's the latest in Business Hotelli.
Thanks so much for that, Roland. Well, on that note, we're going to go for a break now, but coming up on East Asia Tonight, social media buzz is fueling China's beauty industry, pushing it abroad. But can Chinese firms sustain their global rise amid mounting trade barriers? Find out next. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. U.S. President Donald Trump highlighted economic successes and achievements in international peace in his State of the Union speech. Rivals China and Russia, however, were left out. Chinese President Xi Jinping tells German Chancellor Friedrich Merz that their countries should enhance strategic cooperation and partnership. Mr. Merz is calling his two-day visit to Beijing a great opportunity to develop ties. And Hong Kong's finance chief unveils a budget aimed at ramping up investment in AI training and innovation hubs. Now, you may have heard of K-beauty or J-beauty. Now there is a new wave emerging from China, C-beauty. Its cosmetics industry is gaining attention overseas, fueled by social media. And analysts say winning consumer trust will be key to its long-term success. CNA's Rebecca Mateo with this report, part of our week-long deep dive into China ahead of the nation's most important two sessions meetings.
From earth-toned latte looks to new Chinese-style aesthetics, and even boiled water makeup for that understated natural finish, C-beauty trends have taken social media by storm.
Constantly, I'm seeing new trends, new products, and new brands emerging from the Chinese market.
Turning interest into action, 26-year-old Xu Meicheng traveled from Singapore to Shanghai last year. She enrolled in a 5-month course, learning various makeup styles, including the latest in C-beauty. Lessons cost around $3,700. Graduates earned a certificate, and some land opportunities with major brands like Disneyland.
I've already been wanting to move forward with the goal of being a professional makeup artist, but I think the resources here is amazing. So that's why I'm here in China instead of anywhere else.
At home, Chinese cosmetic brands dominate the country's $141 billion beauty market, making up nearly 60% of total sales last year. Many are now looking overseas. Last year, cosmetics firm Joy Group opened its first standalone stores outside China in Singapore.
A few years ago, there was still a taboo around made in China, but after I think the boutique opened up, it really sent out a very strong message whereby now everyone is accepting this sea beauty wave and also knowing that it's very not only affordable but high quality.
The company plans to expand into Malaysia, Thailand, and eventually the Middle East, US, and Europe. Sea beauty companies are also adapting products for overseas markets. Joy Group tells me that some of the items here are made for Singapore's heat and humidity, with a diverse range of shades available. Some aren't even sold in China. In the first 8 months of 2025, China's cosmetics exports rose nearly 12% year-on-year to more than $5 billion, marking a third straight year of double-digit growth. While broader weakness in China's domestic consumption overall has played a role, analysts say the overseas push is largely strategic as competition intensifies at home and demand picks up across emerging markets.
Overseas demand is growing fast, but still smaller in absolute terms. Chinese domestic market is still dominant. It is still gaining its traction in the Southeast Asian market, Japanese market.
Joy Group says it has seen triple-digit growth globally. It began overseas sales in 2021, starting with e-commerce platforms and later through retailers like Watsons in Singapore.
K-beauty is still the largest in scale for us, whilst the Western brands perform strongly in our premium skincare. So what stands out with C-beauty is that it is its newness. It's very active on social media, and we also feel that there's actually a lack of physical presence.
Advisory firm Dazan Shearer and Associates estimates the global sea beauty market could grow from about $19 billion last year to over $49 billion by 2035.
If sea beauty evolves from this trend machine to a trust machine, in using clear claims, substantial claims, and simplified scientific communications. Teach routines, teach about TCM, teach about traditional Chinese cultural relevance of these aesthetics.
Analysts say the next wave of sea beauty could include wellness-focused products, blending skincare, health, and lifestyle. Rebecca Mateo, CNA, Singapore.
For more insights, let's bring in David Zhang, an analyst with Trivium China, a research firm specializing in China's political economy. Well, thanks for joining us this evening, David. So let's just start with how China seems to be pushing outwards very aggressively from EV makers to beauty brands. We're seeing this aggressive expansion. Walk us through, how is this wave of expansion different from what we saw in the past?
Well, we're indeed seeing a new wave of Chinese exports in, what a lot of economists and governments around the world today are calling China Shock 2.0, which is really a fundamentally different model of overseas expansion than we've seen in the past. For decades, China's been able to take advantage of its, low-cost labor, its extraordinary ability to scale up production, to become the world's factory and leader in global outsourcing. But its primary exports during that time were, low-end manufactured goods, such as textiles, toys, consumer electronics that are, usually assembled for foreign brands. But the leaders weren't satisfied with simply being the world's biggest manufacturer of low-end products.
Sure, David. But now on to, there's this big uncertainty that's hanging over trade, and that's tariffs, of course, after that Supreme Court ruling. How does that change China's export outlook over the next year? How do you see it, change?
Yeah, so the new across-the-board tariffs, which now stand at 10%, were good news for China as they, help bring down China's average tariff burden. The same applies to any country that was singled out last year with a combination of reciprocal and other tariffs that exceeded 10%. So in simple terms, that just means we have a playing field that is slightly less tilted against Chinese exports. But there are many caveats, the biggest of which is that the U.S. still has a long list of tariffs, some of which known as Section 301 or Section 232 tariffs, which target a huge swath of Chinese goods as well as specific sectors. And in addition, you also have a long list of anti-dumping and countervailing duties. The U.S. Commerce Department recently just finalized its 205% tariffs on some Chinese materials using lithium ion batteries. So the key point being, none of those other tariffs were affected by the Supreme Court ruling, meaning Chinese industrial goods still face high duties on average.
Right.
So in terms
David,
of the immediate
I want to bring in the politics
outlook,
side of things, because trade is never just about economics, right? And Beijing has said time and time again that it will firmly safeguard its own interests. So if President Donald Trump does visit China next month, how do you see today's current trade tensions shaping the tone and perhaps the scope of any negotiation and talks?
Well, the tone will probably still be one of, managing tensions and preventing escalation. You will probably hear talk of, cooperation and mutual interests, avoiding conflicts. But it's less clear, if we'll have any broad transformative announcement on trade. We'll more likely have extensions of the existing trade ceasefire that was agreed to when the leaders met in Korea in October. So Beijing's goal is fundamentally about stability, right? A more predictable external environment for Chinese exports, preferably in the long run. They see U.S. tariffs and other restrictive actions as destabilizing. So the priority is trying to lock in more guardrails around U.S.-China trade relations.
Right. Many thanks for your analysis. Appreciate your time and thoughts. David Zhang, analyst with Trivium China, speaking to us from Washington. Right. We are going to go for another break now, but coming up on East Asia Tonight, U.S. President Donald Trump paints a rosy picture of the American economy, the longest ever State of the Union speech. Well, we fact-check some of his key claims.
Fair.
Donald Trump takes a victory lap using his State of the Union address to paint a picture of a booming economy, plunging inflation, strong job growth, a record stock market, and even suggests that tariffs could replace income taxes. Well, CNA's Roland Lim checks some of Mr. Trump's key claims.
U.S. President Trump is not a man to let the facts get in the way when it comes to hyperbole. Now, let's start with the economy. The U.S. economy did grow in 2025, but roaring like never before needs context. Official data shows that real GDP grew 2.2% in 2025, and that's down from 2.8% in 24. Now, that's resilient growth, but not an acceleration. As for the cost of living, Mr. Trump said that inflation is plummeting. Now, inflation has cooled compared to the peak of 2022, but the key question is whether it's back to the Fed's 2% target. The Fed's preferred gauge, that's core personal consumption expenditures, that ran about 3% year on year in the latest December reading and rose 0.4% month on month. Sticky enough to keep the Fed cautious on cutting interest rates. So easing, yes, plummeting, debatable. Third, jobs. Now, Trump highlighted job creation and said that the gains are in the private sector, saying that more Americans are working today than at any time in the country's history. Now, here's the bigger picture. A major revision showed that the U.S. added about 181,000 jobs in all of 25. Now, considered weak for a non-recession year. And January's hiring rebound was concentrated in healthcare and social assistance. The job market isn't collapsing, but it isn't booming either. Fourth, the stock market. Now, Trump touted the markets have hit record highs, and it's true. Major indices have hit new highs at points during his second term. But record highs don't automatically mean best performance. Now, one yardstick fact checkers note that S&P 500 was roughly 15% higher since he took office for his second term. That's strong, but certainly not extraordinary by historical standards. And finally, tariffs. Mr. Trump suggested that tariffs could replace the income tax and often frames these levies as paid by foreign countries. And most economists and budget analysts say that's just bad maths and doesn't add up. Now, tariff revenues are far smaller than income tax receipts, and tariffs are typically paid at the border by importers, with costs often passed on to U.S. businesses and consumers. Recent data show that tariff revenues have increased, but they remain a fraction of what the U.S. collects from individual income taxes. For CNA Explains, I'm Roland Lim.
Our countries, meantime, are ramping up defense spending amid rising geopolitical tensions. A record $2.6 trillion was spent in 2025 to bolster military readiness worldwide. But as the International Institute for Strategic Studies points out in its Military Balance report, that spending surge was not even. Ollie Barrett files this report for CNA from London.
North Korea's nuclear programs, China's growing military power and US attempts to contain it with the help of regional allies are all defining East and Southeast Asia's defense landscape, according to the Institute's latest Military Balance report. Tokyo is planning to deploy missiles to an island just off Taiwan after last year calling any invasion of it by China an existential threat for Japan. And South Korea has become the first non-NATO ally to promise defense spending of around 3.5% of GDP in response to US pressure. And in return, it will get American assistance building nuclear-powered attack submarines, which it says are necessary to match North Korea's arsenal. All of this, analysts say, as China appears to be working on a fourth aircraft carrier after launching its third last year, and is designing a new generation of nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines.
Aside from developing next-generation crewed and uninhabited combat aircraft, the PLA Air Force pressed ahead with the introduction of modern combat aircraft. The IISS assesses that over 300 J-20 aircraft have now been delivered, and the first batch of J-35A aircraft also entered into service in 2025. China now possesses the largest fleet of low observable combat aircraft in the Asia-Pacific region.
Elsewhere, the report's authors expect this year will see progress on NATO's attempts to fortify its eastern flank with Russia, with physical defences, surveillance systems and a so-called drone wall of layered anti-drone countermeasures. That could also include the laying of landmines, as the Baltic states, Poland and Finland complete their withdrawal from the Ottawa Treaty that prohibits anti-personnel mines, citing the threat from Russia. In its operations in Ukraine, Russia is facing some difficulties.
We've obviously seen Russia suffer quite significant, or a higher rate of loss at the end of last year going to the start of this year, partly related to their decision to pursue a more aggressive offensive stance. At the moment, the rate of loss is putting pressure. It's outstripping their ability to recapitalise that. So that would put pressure on their current operational posture if that were to continue. However, they do have obviously the option of scaling back on some of their offensive activity to counterbalance that. I think it's also worth bearing in mind that Russia does have, as an ultimate fallback option, the ability to conduct a wider mobilization of the Russian state and the Russian people, should it really feel the need to bolster personnel resources for this war.
In the Middle East, analysts believe the conflict between Israel and the United States with Iran looks set to continue unless ongoing negotiations produce breakthrough results. Last year's American and Israeli attacks exposed serious vulnerabilities in Iran's air defense network, according to the report. It's not known to what degree Iran has repaired its defenses in anticipation of further attacks. All the uncertainty means nations are trying to outspend regional rivals. Analysts here note China's defence budget is outpacing the wider region. Europe's defence spending is rising at a record rate to counter the threat from Russia, and the world is now spending more than 2% of GDP on defence. For CNA, I'm Ollie Barrett in London.
South Korea is seeing a baby rebound. The number of births last year grew at the fastest pace in 15 years. Well, it's a happy reversal for a country that has posted the lowest birth rate in the world for years. A provisional government data shows more than 250,000 babies were born last year, up 6.8% from 2024. Now that is the steepest on-year increase since 2010 and the second consecutive uptick in the number of newborns. The total fertility rate is now at 0.8, a slight increase from 2024, but still well under the replacement rate of 2.1. Now, South Korea was on the brink of a population collapse, its birth rate falling with no end in sight until 2 years ago. Now, we examine what's behind this baby rebound.
So, I don't know, if someone was going to give you $75,000 to have a child, is that a big enough incentive?
That's exactly what one South Korean company is doing. Construction giant Buyong hands out 100 million Korean won each time an employee has a baby, and is backdating payments to workers who started a family before the policy came about. The move continues to make headlines every year, and other companies have followed suit with their own baby bonuses. Some doubt these corporate incentives can lift South Korea out of its population crisis. But it's part of a wider movement in a country with the world's lowest birth rate. President Lee Jae-myung recently vowed to smash the devil of housing speculation, warning people with multiple homes to think of the blood and tears of millions of young people who can't afford a home because of runaway prices. Mr. Yee's predecessor, the now impeached and jailed Yoon Sung-yeol, declared a national demographic emergency back in 2024, vowing to tackle the problem with an all-out cross-government effort. Since then, a slew of government incentives to get South Koreans to embrace babies. Cash vouchers for newborns, doubling paternity leave to 20 days, and up to 18 months of childcare leave for families that need it the most. A new right to disconnect law is also in the pipeline this year to let workers lawfully ignore work messages after hours. South Korea's demographic plunge started in 2015, when its already low fertility rate dived for 8 consecutive years to a disastrous 0.72. But in 2024, the line went up just a tiny bit for the first time, on the back of couples tying the knot after pandemic delays and aggressive pro-family government policies. And now, 2025 saw a second uptick. Analysts say this could be an inflection point for the country's population problem. But whether the baby rebound can be sustained, only time will tell.
Now that wraps up Wednesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And look us up on all the socials. Thanks for watching.